Welcome to today's YouTube video. And today our topic is reasons to breathe through your nose. Now, people always talk about why mouth breathing is bad for you. And the number one insult online is to call someone a mouth breather. And everyone's very quick to say as to why mouth breathing is bad for you. But people often don't go to the contrary second option that we have to stay alive, and that's nasal breathing. No one explains it. No one actually goes through the in-depth reasons as to why we should actually nasal breathe. They just say why mouth breathing is bad for you. So I'm going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum so that we can actually be motivated and inspired to start breathing through our nose more often than we do through our mouth. On to the first reason, and that reason is when we breathe through our nose, it actually filters the air for us. Now, what does filtering the air really mean? Well, it just means that the cavities, the nostril cavities, when you breathe through them, actually help to moisten the air. So, if you don't know, our lungs hate dry air. Dry air eventually ends up completely drying out the mucous membranes and eventually drying up the actual lung tissue. In hospitals, they actually use humidifiers along with oxygen therapy, because otherwise, if they don't use humidifiers, the lungs get so dry that they actually become damaged. So their regulatory functions for the different types of epithelial tissue becomes dry, crackly, damaged, and eventually leads to cell death. So it's not exactly what your lungs want. So yeah, every time you breathe through your mouth, there's some moisture that does come through, but it's really not optimal, and the majority of the moisture that's going to happen through inhalation would be through your nose. So yeah, that's one of the most important reasons you would want to breathe through your nose instead. The second reason follows on from the first reason, and that's that it keeps your mouth moist. Because if you breathe through your mouth, of course, you're going to be drying out your mouth quite a bit. I don't think people realize how much saliva actually takes up from the water content that you consume. Now, of course, the most important use of water in your body is to obviously supply that water to your blood. So, and to make sure all the formed elements can actually have something to move through. So, what can happen, of course, is if you don't adequately resupply or compensate for the dehydration you're causing by breathing through your mouth over the course of a day, and you will eventually lead to some extra dehydration and eventual increase in blood pressure. So those are two things you don't really want, and there are lots of secondary complications that of course come with this. And it has been proven that people who do breathe through their mouth do eventually have high levels of dehydration over the course of a day, as they just cannot adequately consume enough water to compensate for the fact that they are drying out their mouth constantly. The third benefit is quite surprising. It's not as obvious as the first two, and that's that it promotes nitric oxide production. Now, nitric oxide has been known to have multiple benefits in various domains of the body. Primarily, of course, mental. So it's usually mental or nerve related. So the main ones are a boost in mental focus and clarity, eventually increased available lung capacity because it actually dilates the nerves that innervate the lungs, and it slows down your resting heart rate. So all the regulatory nerves that innervate the heart are also stimulated to make sure that it slows down and stops pumping too vivaciously. And the last one is, of course, calming down the entire brain and nervous system. So your entire central nervous system that gets activated by the sympathetic nervous system eventually gets a signal to calm down, rest, digest, all those good things. So if you're someone who is very prone to anxiety, to maybe being a bit fidgety, but frantic, maybe having anger outbursts, all kinds of things, a boost, or maybe just brain fog. You could just have a general haze or brain fog, can't think clearly. If you have lung problems, heart problems, anything, nitric oxide can be a big benefit in all those domains. And when you breathe through your nostrils, so nasally, you produce some of this nitric oxide as a byproduct that immediately circulates through your bloodstream and has all these benefits that are aforementioned. I think people underestimate how powerful this benefit can be, especially if you become a habitual nasal breather. You'll start to see a big difference in your mood, cognitive performance, all kinds of things that you thought probably weren't possible. I mean, I know I didn't until I actually tested it, and yeah, all these benefits are definitely something I've experienced. And the last weird and wacky benefit is that your facial structure over time can actually change. That's often something that people don't actually realize, is that the pressure that's exerted through air moving through a passage also places pressure, interstitial pressure, onto the bony compartments of your face. So if you primarily breathe through your mouth, that's going to exert different pressure than breathing through your nose alone, or mostly alone at least. There are some instances you obviously have to mouth breathe. So what happens when you breathe nasally is that it actually places pressure on the bony compartments of your upper face, but it also realigns your lower face because you're no longer breathing through your mouth. So things that you can see, for example, would be your cheekbones. They move up and outwards, become wider up and outwards, which is more aesthetically pleasing. I mean, that's why high cheekbones are like a thing in the fashion industry. So that's partly where your bones will shift. Another area would be your jaw. So primarily breathing through your mouth, your jaw is always in a relaxed, open kind of position, which is not great for jaw aesthetics or the pressure that you're placing on that jaw either. So what you'll see when you breathe through mainly your nose is that your jaw actually becomes a little more angular. It starts to press more downwards, like so. You start getting more of a sharper jaw. Other things that could be included are your chin. So some people with, recessed chins, you don't want a caveman chin either, I guess, unless you're a man. But your chin also tends to move a bit more forward when you don't mouth breathe. So that's primarily just not mouth breathing, not nasal breathing primarily, but of course, what else are you going to do? You're going to have to nasal breathe. So by nasal breathing only, your chin moves a bit more forward, a bit more less recessed. Obviously, these aesthetic changes are great, but it's also probably healthier in terms of bone morphology to move to these meridians as well. You can also see your hypoglossal muscles also change. So these are the kind of muscles in your submental zone, so below here. So these muscles, if you don't have fat covering them, some people are also wondering why the kind of like jawline is not as sharp as it could be, even though they have low body fat and stuff like that. It's these hypoglossal muscles underneath here that have to do with your tongue and other compartments and other things below your jaw. They seem to tighten up if you don't mouth breathe. Because when you mouth breathe, you're constantly, by opening the epiglottis, by speaking even, but mouth breathing as well, and opening epiglottis. You're relaxing your jaw again, and you're relaxing and lengthening these muscles, which can often make them droop. So you start to see a drooping effect underneath here, where if you nasally breathe primarily, they will actually start to tighten up. They'll get tighter, less loose, and yeah, it'll look like you have less of an under chin going on, which is also very obviously aesthetic. So yeah, so those are some benefits for those of us more vanity inclined. Okay, so in conclusion, if you want to get some of these benefits, what should I do? How do I make sure that I actually adjust to this? Now, this is the hardest part because a lot of breathing is autonomic, right? It's autonomous. We don't really think about it. It just happens. So some of these tips include whenever you're conscious of your breathing, whenever you realize that you're breathing a certain way, obviously revert it to nasal breathing. So forcefully nasal breathe until you lose consciousness of that particular breathing pattern. So nasal breathe until you obviously forgetting that you're nasal breathing. So why we do this is that eventually it becomes habit. So hopefully by nasal breathing or occasionally nasal breathing, you're now teaching your body a new way of breathing, and then hopefully that becomes now a habit that it does autonomously by itself. So that's obviously not the best way to go about it. So there's other tips. Other tips include doing a meditative practice in the morning for 3 minutes and before you go to bed for another 3 minutes. I understand that's not everyone's cup of tea, but if that is, it'll help a lot because you again are forcing your body to breathe a certain way. You're teaching it a new way of breathing. A third thing to keep note of is that when you exercise, totally okay to mouth breathe, actually sometimes better because you get more of an oxygen uptake. Intense exercise sessions, especially heavy cardio sessions, yeah, just do breathe through your mouth. I think this is the only time you're given a pass. But just make sure that every other time that you're conscious of breathing through your nose only. A last hack, because for me that wasn't enough. For me, that was still airy-fairy kind of, okay, I only do when I'm conscious, I do my meditative practice. But how am I sure that I'm not mouth breathing autonomously throughout the majority of the day? So I found an ingenious hack, which if you have sleep apnea, please don't do this. That would be heavily contraindicated. But if you don't have any problems with your nasal cavities or having clear airways, then one good hack would be to use surgical tape. So surgical tape isn't as intense as you think, as it sounds. It's not this intense tape. It's actually more like it's like a very weak masking tape in a way. It really doesn't hurt to take off. It's very easy to apply. You literally just get a strip, put it across your mouth before you go to bed. And while you sleep, of course, your body has no option to breathe through your mouth. So it automatically switches over to breathing through your nose instead. So for at least, if you sleep with a good 8 hours, for at least 8 hours of your day, you have practiced nasal breathing automatically. And it's even better because while you're sleeping, it's the automatic process. So you are now jump-starting your autonomic nervous system to try and primarily nasally breathe. So that is definitely the best, most effective way. I've not once, after adapting this or to this protocol, I've not once realized that I was mouth breathing. Where beforehand, I would still realize, here and there, man, I did it again. But yeah, after adopting this protocol for at least, I think, a month, after that month of adopting this protocol, I think my body's automatic system wants to nasally breathe. So it's definitely the most effective protocol out of this list. So I hope that helps you, and I hope you try it out.